Welcome to Theory Underground. What you're about to hear is a lecture that we're making freely available thanks to the folks over at Patreon who fund the free content here at Theory Underground. This was recorded as a part of an ongoing year-long course at Theory Underground called The Philosophy of Stewardship and Home Economics. If you want to get involved, become a subscriber at theoryunderground.com/subscribe. But before we get started, I want to tell you about something exciting. I made a game. It's called Canon TCG, which stands for trading card games. So it's the Canon, the liberal arts trading card game. First of its kind, collectible, playable, lots of fun. But as Matthew Stanley says here, it's not just a game. It is a technology for social engagement and a whole new way of learning. If that's interesting to you, you might want to be there for Canon Fest at the end of August. That'll be your opportunity to get your hands on the first edition cards in this game, play with a bunch of people who are into philosophy, theory, literature, science, math, and alternative approaches to education. And it will be happening simultaneous to TUCon 2026, the Theory Underground Conference. If you want to be there for that, it's a family-friendly event. Get involved now. Apply today. The form is in the description of this video as well as in the pinned comment. Hope to see you there. All right, so before we get to it, just remember, the game that I made is called Canon TCG. It's gonna be awesome. You can support it, you can get involved now. Canon Fest is at the end of August. You're probably gonna wanna be there. All right, now let's get to it. All right, everybody, welcome to the Philosophy of Stewardship guest lecture with Matthew Stanley. This is something that I'm very excited about because The One Straw Revolution is a book that pretty much anybody who's into regenerative agriculture or permaculture has heard about, but have they actually heard a real lecture on it? No. And how many of those lectures, if they had ever had the opportunity for a lecture on it, would have been by somebody who has a background in Žižek, psychoanalysis, philosophy, theory. I mean, really, this is an amazing opportunity. And Matthew's someone who's been a fellow traveler of and student with Theory Underground here for a long time. We've met him in person a couple of times, and we'll be again this year. And so really, this is an exciting thing. He also does lectures for Insight seminars and has really great writing over on his Substack. So make sure to check that out. But without further ado, please put your hands together, welcoming here to the virtual stage, Matthew Stanley.
Hey, everyone. Thanks, Dave. I appreciate the opportunity to give this lecture. The One Straw Revolution is a book that my wife and I first read together. Actually, we were driving back for the holidays from living up in Washington, and we had been in a used bookstore in Seattle, and we just found this book and we were like, this looks awesome. So we just bought it. And on the drive down, whoever was sitting in the passenger seat would read it to the person who was in the driver's seat. And we read the whole book on the way down. And so, that's a beautiful memory that I associate with this book. And I feel like that made the material so much more vivid and interesting, and was able to just engage with it in a slow way. So it was really fun to reread the book with an eye towards being able to talk about it with other people. Before we get into it, I actually want to visually and geographically orient everyone to where Fukuoka Sensei lives and where he lived his life, just so people can kind of visually understand a little bit. So I'm going to share my screen really quick and just orient you all to that. Okay. So let's go ahead. We're going to look at a map of Japan. So the One Straw Revolution was written by Masanobu Fukuoka. His surname is Fukuoka, so he would be Fukuoka Masanobu. And I often refer to him as Fukuoka Sensei. So Fukuoka Sensei was born on the island of Shikoku. Shikoku is the fourth and the smallest of the Japanese islands. You've got Kyushu, Shikoku, Honshu, and Hokkaido. Um, so he lived his early life. He lived near Tokyo in Yokohama. So his first job was working at the plant inspection division at the Yokohama Customs Bureau. So Yokohama is famously kind of like the biggest, most important port in Japan. So this is their big port where everything's coming in internationally. So he's working for the division that is inspecting plants and things that are coming in from abroad. He's looking for disease, things that they don't want coming into the country. So that's what he does in his early life. And it's when he's working this job that he's also working at a local laboratory doing his own experiments. And he ends up contracting pneumonia and spending about a year in a hospital. And this experience was an important catalyst for why he decided to change his direction in his life. And so what he does is he moves back to where he was born and where he grew up. So he was born and he grew up in Iyo, right here on the island of Shikoku, in Ehime Prefecture. And when he talks about the inland sea, which is getting polluted, he's talking about this area right in here, this area of ocean that is between the island of Honshu and Shikoku. So Shikoku is kind of a weird little town, or not a town, but an island. It's pretty backwards. It's pretty small. It's obviously the least populated of the four islands. Um, During the World War II, he works in Kochi right here as the head of the agricultural experimentation station before he returns to the land in Iyo, where he ends up spending the rest of his life farming an area of about 2/3 of an acre. So hopefully that was helpful. Just to visually orient you, there's this is the town where he was born and where he died. He lived to be 95 years old. He lived from 1913 to 2008. You can look online and you can watch videos of interviews with him. And he was farming all the way up until he passed away, although with increasingly more help. So, with that kind of setting the stage, Fukuoka Sensei wrote The One Straw Revolution in 1975. He had been farming for many, many decades at that point. And of course, he had many more decades of farming ahead of him. So, by the end of his life, he'd roughly been farming with his methods 50 to 60 years ish. So it was really his life's work was revitalizing this piece of land that he had purchased. And this piece of land that he purchased was seen as totally barren and useless. So the original owner had even tried to break up the land using dynamite. It was so rock hard. It was a very not useful land. And this is really common in Japan, actually, since Japan is a volcanic island. Most of its land is very rocky. It doesn't have a lot of topsoil. So much like there's not a lot of arable land in Japan. In fact, a lot of the food in Japan is grown up in Hokkaido, which wasn't colonized actually until like the late 1800s, and that's where the majority of like the actual farmland and pasture raising and stuff like that happens in Japan today. So, um, unlike China, where many of their agricultural methods were imported from, which has the Yangtze River Valley and tons of rivers and flat land and lots of arable land to be able to grow a ton of grains for a large population. Japan never had that. They don't have inland rivers and all that kind of thing. So, anyways, to kind of bring things back, the One Straw Revolution by Fukuoka Sensei is kind of his breakout work that many people have heard of, many people have read, especially in kind of various ecological and regenerative circles. It's a manual of farming, but more than that, it is a philosophical manifesto about the limits of knowledge, what human beings are, what we're capable of, and what we're not capable of, especially. So, I want to talk about the farming aspect of it, but I am not someone who is a farmer. I have ambitions in growing and learning in that area. That's why my family's going to be spending a week at Dave's farm with his parents to learn from them. Um, and Fukuoka Sensei thinks that everybody should be farming at least enough to be able to feed themselves. But in the US, farmers compose 2% of the population. That's been pretty much flat since 1980. And in most industrial nations, that's roughly where farmers fall. So we see the rate of farmers in society falling to about that 2% all over the place. Fukuoka sensei develops a natural farming method, and we're going to talk about that, but I do want to just preface it that my interests are philosophical and focused on society and politics. And so I want to show why his farming ideas and the motivations and insights that underlie them are relevant to everybody, regardless of whether you live on a farm or not. So, what can we learn if we don't grow rice or care for citrus orchards? That's what I'm interested in. So fundamentally, Fukuoka sensei lays out at the beginning of his book this guiding insight that he had as a young man. And it shapes and motivates his work for his entire life. Really, his entire life's work is seen as an attempt to test this singular insight that he had. And he says it like this: humanity knows nothing at all. There is no intrinsic value in anything, and every action is a futile, meaningless effort. He first thought this at a young age, and he struggled to come to grips with this brutal insight. It was so abstract that he couldn't communicate it to other people. So he decided, well, eventually I decided to give my thoughts a form, to put them into practice, and to determine whether my understanding was right or wrong. So that was where his practical experiment began. Humanity knows nothing at all. How can I demonstrate this or prove that it's not the case? And so this fundamental insight about the limits and the impossibility of knowledge is what underlies and motivates Fukuoka's work. This is why it's not primarily academic work. He didn't write this until the 70s. And after that, he went around and gave talks and tried to communicate with people. But fundamentally, he knew that it was his work in his fields, in his land, that is what was going to demonstrate whether his insight was correct or not. It's his words stand or fall with whether he can show that he can grow as much rice or more as an industrial agricultural operation with his methods. So this fundamental critique of knowledge, this intuition that he has about whether knowledge is possible, forms the core motivation of his work. And in this work, he distinguishes between two different types of knowledge that I want us to stay clear about, because sometimes I think that he is not always clear about them and when he's communicating. First, there is discriminatory knowledge. This is knowledge that is understood from the standpoint of the self, which separates this and not this. There's where knowledge draws this distinction between the inside and the outside, or it discriminates as itself or not itself. So this type of knowing, the knower isolates the known thing from the world and from the knower. And invisibly, the knower also separates themselves from the object known and from the world that they are knowing. So this is this is knowledge in his mind. This is what happens when you try to gain knowledge or to understand something. Now, he's also critical of the scientific method, which is, I think we all understand that science is not the only form of how knowledge can go about itself, go about confirming its own insights or of gaining understanding of the world. But sometimes he shades these into each other because he trained as a scientist and he deals with scientists every day. And farmers have to interact with scientists all the time. So he's also engaging in a critique of scientific knowledge. The two shade into each other, though. That's the thing, is that for him, scientific knowledge is an extreme intensification of the tendencies that are already inherent within this discriminatory knowledge. So it amplifies and it intensifies these issues. So the community and institutions which practice this objective knowledge. They are isolating certain variables within systems. They are trying to get this knowledge of the whole by schematizing all the parts and then testing how the particular parts work. And in this method, they end up losing the whole because they are overly focused on each of the individual parts, and they can only understand each part in relation to other parts. Rather than inhabiting the whole, they're constantly engaged in this work of isolating and intervening in things. And then their interventions change the very thing that they're trying to study. So he's also interested in the way that these institutions are incompetent, hubristic, and captured by business interests. He's not super explicit about that all the time, but he's wrestling with that. But I think that he just understands those things are outside of his control. And but for him, it's fundamentally it's this. There's some sort of desire which is clouding our ability to see true nature, whether that is the desire to be perceived as objective and right, whether it's a desire to bring about a better world, or whether it's a desire to make more money. Some sort of desire is distorting the ability to really see nature as it is. So he sees knowledge as people's inability to know the whole. They can't know the whole. So they develop an incomplete model and they delude themselves into thinking that they've created something natural, something that really reflects what is true. And then they end up serving their models rather than finding how to live in what he calls nature's pattern. So Fukuoka sensei's work, in my opinion, it clearly evokes a particular strain of East Asian philosophy, one dominated by Daoist thinking and then Mahayana Buddhist thinking. So these two traditions kind of influence each other. When Buddhism came to China from India, it kind of got refracted through the indigenous Taoist traditions and gave us this Mahayana Buddhism that is dominant in China, Korea, and Japan. In Japan, we in the West, people are most familiar with Zen, which is a Mahayana Buddhist tradition, which is contrasted with other traditions more in Southeast Asia. They have a different emphasis. In particular, when I read Fukuoka sensei, his work kind of evokes a Chinese philosopher named Zhuangzi from the 4th century. Zhuangzi emphasized how our human culture was artificial and how it distorts our natural instincts and it alienates us from nature's wisdom. So for him, life was not about abstract ideas or ambition or ritual, but rather we wanted to remove everything that stands between us and recognizing each moment for what it is. In fact, society and technology, society as a technology, stands between us and the ability to really engage with the present. There's a story that I really like that he tells in one of his writings about a guy who sees is a philosopher's walking along and he sees this peasant who's working really hard in his field. And the guy goes, there's a machine for this sort of thing. In one day, it can carry water across 100 fields, demanding very little effort and producing excellent results. Wouldn't you like one? And the gardener raised his head and looked and said, how does it work? And the philosopher says, it's a contraption made by shaping a piece of wood. The back end is heavy and the front end light, and it raises water as though it were pouring it out. So fast, it seems to boil right over. It's called a well sweep. The gardener flushed with anger, and then he said with a laugh, I've heard my teachers say, where there are machines, there are bound to be machine worries. Where there are machine worries, there are bound to be machine hearts. With a machine heart in your breast, you've spoiled what was pure and simple. And without the pure and simple, the life of the spirit knows no rest. Where the life of the spirit knows no rest, the way will cease to buoy you up. It's not that I don't know about your machine. I would be ashamed to use it. The philosopher blushed with chagrin, looked down, and made no reply. And after a while, the gardener said, who are you anyway? He says, I am a disciple of Confucius. So Zhuangzi is critical of Confucius and his disciples, as you can tell. Yuqui's gloss on this story is that what Zhuangzi wants to say in this story is that one should avoid developing a machine heart, a calculative mind is one way that Yokui translates the term. Otherwise, one will lose the way and along with it, one's freedom. If one always thinks in terms of machines, one will develop a machinic form of reasoning. So this Taoist tradition is about this return to nature, non-action, about an attempt to be in the present. And this is also true of Mahayana traditions and Zen. So um, Zen emphasizes no thought. Fukuoka talks about the mind of the baby. There is no left, there's no right. In nature, there's no left, no right, nor north or south. And so, like a wheel with its hub and spokes, everything moves, but the void in the center is immovable. The void in the center of the circle always stays exactly where it is. And so the question is, how do you inhabit the unmoving center of things, which is nothingness? The core of nothingness is no mind and non-action. Back to the center. So Fukuoka says, like, just to live here and now. This is the true basis of human life. Or similarly, it would be well if people stopped troubling themselves about discovering the true meaning of life. We can never know the answers to great spiritual questions, but it's all right not to understand. We have been born and are living on the earth to face directly the reality of living. So, this is the tradition that Fukuoka sensei is coming from. This tradition that's critical of society, it's critical of technology, it's critical of discriminating knowledge that looks to separate this and not this. They think that it leads to an unnecessary increase in suffering, an alienation from nature's wisdom and patterns. And it's like trying to live into an artificial world that doesn't exist. And so it just continuously multiplies busyness and suffering as it tries to cover over its own tracks and deal with the new dysfunctions that it creates. So that's kind of the tradition that he's coming from with this idea about humanity is doesn't know anything. Um, of course, it would do little to counter the limits of knowledge with more attempts to reach even clearer knowledge. So what he does is he develops this technique of natural farming to demonstrate the folly of the scientific method, which is founded on discriminating knowledge. So what he describes as the do nothing farming is as his method is it's not lazy and it's not easy, but it's not busy. Instead of adding more, Fukuoka sensei asks what he can take away. What if I didn't do this? And in this move, we already see the beginning of a critique of scientific method. The scientific method keeps looking for new things to add. It keeps looking for new things to do. What if we tried this? What if we added that? What if we intervened in this way? And Fukuoka sensei wants us to see that interventions multiply interventions. The more you do, the more you have to do. Because when you intervene, you set things off balance. And now you have to do another thing to try to restore the balance. But that thing that tries to restore the balance further sets the balance off kilter because you've introduced a new element and then a new element and then a new element. And for instance, I mean, this is where we kind of get into the specifics, and the specifics are interesting because they have how they demonstrate the reality of the principle. Um, you cleared your land, so there's nothing there's no carbon matter that is replenishing the soil. So now you have to add nitrogen to the soil. So, or you cleared all the undergrowth. So now you have to go and weed regularly. But if you hadn't cleared the undergrowth, which is work, then you wouldn't have to weed, which is work. So you've done double work, and you've gotten a worse outcome in the process. You spray a chemical that kills insects. Well, you've also killed the predators who eat the insects. And then those predators aren't there to eat other food in the ecosystem. And the food that eats the predators isn't getting its food either. And so suddenly you've got this barren system that it's not resilient. It doesn't have all of its members anymore. If you grow fruit out of season, you have to add sweeteners and coloring. The list goes on and on. Every intervention prepares the way for the necessity of another intervention. And this is why when you start taking interventions away, you are able to do less, the do nothing. But what you're doing is you're trying to get back to the healthy ecosystem, which is resilient and functioning the way that it's supposed to. He says, when a decision is made to cope with the symptoms of a problem, it's generally assumed that the corrective measures will solve the problem itself. They seldom do. Engineers cannot seem to get this through their heads. These countermeasures are all based on too narrow a definition of what is wrong. Human measures and countermeasures proceed from limited scientific truth and judgment, and a true solution can never come about in this way. So, the principles of natural farming, as Fukuoka sensei develops them, is an attempt to treat nature as smarter than we are. How do you allow the system to do its thing, to be resilient, to be healthy, and you will watch the problems that you're trying to solve disappear? Because nature has already solved these problems. Otherwise, it would not have been able to propagate itself. We wouldn't have plants and animals and thriving ecosystems if the system hadn't already encountered and developed a solution for these problems that we have. It's not like insects are new. It's not like any of these plants are new. Nature has been growing and developing. And if you go out to the side of the mountain, there's lush plants growing everywhere. So clearly, nature has solved the problem already. The question is, how do we get on board with what the ecosystem is doing and trust that it is smart? Trust that it's smarter than we are. And that even though each part doesn't necessarily understand its role, the whole system is working together. So his principles are, first, there's no cultivation. You do not plow the ground, you do not till the ground. Instead, you just throw seeds straight onto the ground. Now, he does he puts the seeds into these little clay balls. So he packs the seeds inside these clay, and then he throws these. And so basically he's not leaning over and planting them in rows. He's not tearing up the ground. He's just putting the seeds into these little clay balls and he's just throwing them. Next is no chemical fertilizer or compost. So instead of using any sort of fertilizer that puts nutrients into the ground, instead of clearing organic matter away and then composting it and putting it back, what you're doing is you are using ground cover to reduce weeds, as well as to create organic matter that's going to return into the topsoil. You're using chicken poop and to spread the field. Instead, if you're just constantly putting organic matter on the ground, that is the fundamental stuff of healthy topsoil. So for him, the next principle is no weeding by tillage or herbicide. So instead, he uses straw mulch, he grows clover, and he occasionally does some temporary flooding of the fields. So the clover prevents the seeds of the weeds, which are flying in the wind, it prevents them from finding a place to land and put down their roots because something's already growing there. He puts down, like when he threshes the rice, he then takes the straw from the rice that he's threshed and he lays that down. And that's going to decompose. It's going to cover the ground so that it's not exposed for all of the weeds to be able to propagate themselves into. As well as temporary flooding kills anything that might be any sort of plants that might be trying to put down root. It's going to cause their roots to rot. Finally, no dependence on chemicals. Thus, he says the sensible approach to disease and insect control is to grow sturdy crops in a healthy environment. Plants have had to develop defenses against insects. Otherwise, they would have been completely eaten up and they never would have been able to propagate themselves in the first place. Just like a healthy human being can fight off a disease, so too a healthy plant can fight off a disease. So if you grow a sturdy crop, which is to say a, a cultivar that is known to be hardy, and it's in a good environment, and it has lots of nutrients, it has everything that it needs, it is going to be able to fight off insects, it's going to be able to fight off disease, just like a human being would be able to, just like any other creature would be able to. The fundamental principle that underlies this is the idea that if nature is left to itself, fertility increases. Now, this is opposite of the way that we often view things. We think if you leave something to itself, if you leave a system alone, it is going to use itself up and it's going to become more fragile over time. But this is not exactly how ecosystems work. Ecosystems can become more fertile over time as they begin to as energy and forces start to reinforce each other. You have things dying, feeding the next generation. The next generation is growing healthier and stronger. The things are starting to work together, and you're getting flywheels. So that's his basic contention is if you let nature do its thing, it's going to become more fertile. Fertility is nature's sort of just natural tendency is towards more complexity, towards more things living together and finding ways to use each other. He views nature as something that is generous in its provision rather than stingy. So he views the whole ecosystem as generous, as smarter than we are, and it's able to solve these problems and thrive. We have to get into the system and allow the system to solve these problems. And what human beings do is we isolate one variable from the whole, and then we exploit that one isolated mechanism and we cause imbalances in nature's pattern, which this by like design by sorry which ends up requiring more work from us in order to correct the situation. We are either resisting the consequences of setting things off balance, or we're having to add in additional interventions to try to shore up and correct the issues. For instance, he says if you clear the land and plant, it erodes the land and it's depleted. But if you plant trees and undergrowth, the soil will be restored. Doesn't it seem like more living things would erode the soil? No, actually, soil improvement happens through more things living and dying rather than less. Then you've got tree roots breaking up the ground. You've got animals pooping. You've got animals, both the fertility from their poop as well as the seeds in their fruit in their poop as well. So one thing, this principle of ecology is something that we can apply to a lot of things. That like and the by increasing the overall level of dynamism within a system, that increases the system's resilience. Rather than designing a system which is efficient and optimizes for a single metric or throughput, there's actually like the more that's going on in a system, the more robust it's going to be, which is going to require things that maybe look extraneous or that are not efficient along a single metric. We're seeing this right now with the US and Iran. Nothing is able to get through the Straits of Hormuz, which is where most of the world's oil comes from. Most of the world's oil comes through a tiny little bit of water between Iran and the UAE. And now it's closed. And every country in the world is hurting from this. That is not a robust system. That is a system that was highly optimized and fragile. And that's why it's not able to adapt to these shocks. So he tried to demonstrate this. I really like this experiment that he ran with these insects called the stem borers. And he ran this experiment when he was working at the Kochi testing station, that there's these insects called stem borers, and farmers were spraying in order to kill these things because they burrow into the stem of the rice and kill the rice. And so he ran an experiment where they had one field where they sprayed for them and one field where they didn't. And In the field where they didn't spray, they estimated that they lost roughly a third of the rice to these stem borers in the first generation. But what they found was they ended up getting more rice from the field than the one that they'd sprayed. The reason being is that the rice that was killed, that didn't survive, was the weaker rice. And the stronger rice that did survive was able to take, that then freed up resources for them to grow taller and to take more resources from the soil. And so they actually ended up producing more rice with fewer plants that were healthier. So actually, the system was working as intended. The system self-corrected when the weak rice was killed by the insects. That freed up resources for the other rice to be more productive and actually more fertile than the field where they sprayed to eliminate the insects. It's a fascinating example of how the system is smarter than you are. This approach to natural farming is obviously not popular politically, institutionally, and he gets into why. He's interested in this whole distorted ecosystem amongst businessmen, scientists, consumers, and farmers. We're all kind of caught in this institutional ecosystem where we've got some points here like the government can't advocate for a no-till practice because entire businesses are dependent on selling people tractors. Like you look at Japan has Kubota and Komatsu are two of the top tractor and industrial machine producing companies in the world. My grandfather owns a Kubota tractor. They're really good tractors, but you can't just say, well, no, we shouldn't till at all, because then Kubota is going to run out of, is not going to have money. They're not going to be able to make money from selling tractors anymore. These government agencies are staffed by bureaucrats who are advised by scientists who only work in universities and labs. They're not actual farmers. And they dictate policy for the whole nation as if policy could apply to all places at all times in all seasons or for all crops. It's not properly scoped and it's not properly dynamic. Another thing, the land is cleared for fears of weeds, diseases, and pests, and chemicals are applied. But now these chemicals that are being applied to the land are pouring into the inland sea and they're polluting the ocean. And now there's a whole task force to figure out how do we clean up the ocean. And they're talking about pumping water over the mountains from the Pacific Ocean into the inland sea or other harebrained schemes. This is what he was talking about in the book. So there's now like, because they cannot say, don't put chemicals on your crops, they can't actually solve the problem of why the inland sea is getting polluted. So they have to come up with a different solution for how to clean up the inland sea. So it's this fascinating problem where you can't actually get at the root cause of the problem because there's desire, there's vested interest in the way that things work. He points out that consumers are involved in this problem, though. Consumers want fruit out of season, which necessitates growing things in strange ways, as well as injecting things, coloring them, that kind of thing. And they want vegetables that look a certain way. You know, people say, oh, I don't really care how my food looks, but the truth is they do. We've studied this extensively. They expect a vegetable to look a certain way. They think it looks healthy if it's plump and colorful and that kind of thing, when really it's not necessarily true at all. Farmers are stuck in this system competing for scraps, pennies to the pound, while the government invents new things for them to do. And they cycle through fads, grow wheat, don't grow wheat. And along the way, every one of these fads, every one of these tools, some industry profits from them. So this is why Fukuoka sensei questions the whole system, is that there is fundamentally a desire that is distorting the way that the ability of the system to be able to get at the problem, the real root problem, which is alienation from nature's pattern. He says, extravagance of desire is the fundamental cause which has led the world into its present predicament. I see Fukuoka sensei as this prophet of um, hubris, the scientific project's hubris, and just infinite desire for more and more. We think about this in capitalism, the just our heart is just constantly having its wanting mechanism just pumped full of energy. We're constantly just like this distended ball of desire, never satisfied, always wanting more. And um, that's a system designed to run over the limits of nature, to send things out of balance, to want to isolate some part of the system and just push that to the extreme, sending the whole system off balance. Um, he says to believe that by research and invention, humanity can create something better than nature is an illusion. Well, he hits on the basic drive behind the scientific method, a dissatisfaction with what exists, and a zealous mission to construct an alternate reality which is superior to the one in which we live. So, this futile striving just leads to more suffering. How can we be wise enough and clever enough to make a second nature which is better than the first? So, the moving into kind of what he thinks we should do differently, I keyed in on his claim that he thinks that 100% of people should be farming, but on a small scale, providing enough food to feed themselves. If each family grew enough for itself, everyone would have more free time, he mentions. And so, in the spirit of time energy theory, Fukuoka sensei is a time energy theorist. He thinks that we are wasting our time energy doing a bunch of things that we don't need to do. A lot of our busyness is a result of trying to recover from or cover over our other busyness. Our interventions give birth to more interventions. His belief is that if people farmed and lived as simply as possible, in line with nature, believing that nature is fertile and generous and will provide for our needs, then we would have a lot more free time to, as he said, write poetry. He talks about the beautiful pieces of poetry that people leave at the shrine in his town. Somebody writes a piece of poetry, they go and they leave it at the shrine. It's just a beautiful act of sharing some words, of creating something and sharing something. There's no desire for anything in return. There's no ambition to be recognized by anyone. There's simply just a giving back of something beautiful. And they can do that because they have time energy. In fact, farmers, when not engaged in industrial agriculture, you would have the most time energy. Compare it to the 9 to 5 existence, or what Lindy Mann calls the 4 hour life. You know, the 4 hour life is you get 4 hours after you get home from work on the weekdays, basically to live your entire life, and that's if you go to bed at 10 and have an hour commute. So there's when we think about it fundamentally, um, I think that what is at stake here is the battle over the tempo of our lives. So let me just read what I wrote here. Fukuoka sensei says that we create north and south, east and west. In nature, there is no north and south, east and west. In nature, there is no fast and there is no slow. If we combine this with his comments about having more free time, if everybody farmed and produced their own needs, we can start to see that the battleground we're engaged in is one of tempo. Will we live according to nature's tempo? Or will we live in an artificial tempo created by human civilization, which is ultimately a machine rhythm? It is more monotonous and more intense than nature's rhythm. We think about all, and the beauty of nature too is that it has many rhythms. It has a big rhythm, and it has lots of micro and macro rhythms within that larger rhythm. But our rhythm is the rhythm of the machine just stamping the widget, just the piston just going, and it's the tick of the clock, it's the looking at the watch, it's every moment is exactly the same as the moment before it. It's just the metronome tempo of living in the machine. So to me, I think that Fukuoka sensei, he sees providing for your needs in the simplest way possible, in a way that is aligned with nature's pattern, as a way of getting back into a better tempo. We're entering into a world that proceeds according to a longer pace that creates more space for creativity, for thought, for experimentation. And uh, the irony is that when we add more busyness, we don't actually add more to our lives. We're actually stealing from ourselves. This, I think, is kind of his core insight, is that that's why he thinks that human activity is futile. Clearly, he doesn't really think that all human activity is futile, because he does things. He gets up in the morning, he washes his face, he throws seeds into the field. But he's looking at life and he's saying, so much of what we do is a waste. We could do less and have more. And the fact is, we don't really trust that. We don't really believe that. We think that nature is withholding. We think that we need to master and control in order to get what we want. I think that's kind of like, I'm going to like put an underline there on the question of tempo and civilization. I want to kind of get into, I'm going to skip over my like questions of like where I wonder about Fukuoka's work kind of as a Westerner. And I'm just going to kind of wrap things up with, I find Fukuoka sensei's overall vision very compelling, especially in light of the manifest failures of the scientific project, modern society, capitalism, and the administrative state. What I like is, I really like the way that he phrases this at the end, is he says, we have come to the point at which there is no other way than to bring about a movement, which is not to bring about a movement that is not to bring about anything, a movement not aiming at anything at all. He says, there is no one so great as the one who does not try to accomplish anything. Now, this I hear is like the Bartleby's I would prefer not to. This refusal to act, the refusal to accept the tempo forced upon us, and becoming an obstruction, that just by being an obstruction, you point to something else. I think Bartleby and Fukuoka sensei are people who do not try to accomplish anything. And I think the key word there is try to accomplish anything. The try part, he says that if you try to achieve something, your efforts will not lead to the desired result. This sounds like nihilism, like passivity, but perhaps it's more like surrender. What if this surrender is precisely what's needed to become the clearing ground for a new reality, which is springing up? I wonder if we could view this more as like we've found ourselves in a dynamic vein of history, a stream of history, which we're supposed to follow and explore, not trying to accomplish anything, but allowing something else to work itself out through us, trusting that the whole is more than the sum of its parts. This idea of a movement which does not seek to bring about anything and of not trying to accomplish anything is what Fukuoka calls foolishness comes out looking smart. I think this is sort of it has resonances of Jesus's teaching. It has resonances of Paul's teaching. And that's where I find an interesting crossover. Let's go ahead and put a pin in that. And I'm happy to share about some of my reservations and questions, but I think that I've talked long enough, and we could get into a discussion if others would like.
My first book, Waypoint, is officially re-released as a second edition. It has a new foreword to it. It's going to be really useful for anybody who's wanting to think deeper about time energy theory. Or the rest of that book is going to be really important for anybody wanting to see where time energy theory really comes from in the first place, because that Waypoint is a collection of my essays leading up to a time when I quit from activism, influencer work, and academia, and then took some time out to really think about what I was doing before I finally launched Theory Underground and wrote Time Energy. And so if you're interested in the origins, so to speak, then you might want to pick up a copy of Waypoint or listen to it on Audible. That's right, it's a narrated audiobook thanks to Cy Ewald. So check that out, and yeah.
Yes, if I can jump in, can y'all hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you, Anne.
Cool. I This idea of tempo is so interesting, as I think like Dave and I, especially Dave, who's had, much more experience working various, working class type jobs at various hours of the night. And then I've worked, miscellaneous jobs through college, again, at various hours, various times in the day, to like this PMC-ish kind of work within the university to now, okay, now we're living the farm life. And it's like, yeah, there's kind of a freedom that comes that I wouldn't call, oh, we have our time energy, because obviously we're running a business with it, and so there's everything that comes with having to sustain the business, but there is like, oh, you could take a 2 hour lunch if you want and be with the dogs and be with your kids. And I was able to sit on the couch for my first trimester basically, and like no one cared. And my boss, who was my mother-in-law, was like, yeah, whatever. So like there is this kind of freedom to the time, the way that our day moves about at the same time. You're on all the time. You can't not feed the chickens one day, even on a Sunday, even on Christmas, even on Thanksgiving. Chickens need food. You got to turn on and off the lights for the plants. So there's that aspect of the tempo. And then at the same time, I look, you have accounts of various market gardeners and farmers, kind of similar to like what we do at McKerracher Family Farm, who say, "Oh, I only work, we get everything done in 6 hours a day, 4 days a week." So like they've almost still using these regenerative, no-till, no chemical kind of practices, but have mastered it to the point where it's not all time consuming. But then Dave's taking a picture of me through the through the window right now. I just exposed you. Um,
It's Anneception.
yeah, yeah. Um, what was I gonna say? Dave was, I think, in the piece that he just published on the McKerracher Family Farm Substack, or maybe ours, the Theory Underground Substack. It was like a quote by Wendell Berry about this like exploitative versus nurturant capacities. And when he was reading the like exploitative part, it's like it wants efficiency, this, that. And I'm thinking, well, I do want efficiency on the farm. I do want us to not be wasting our time. So like I don't know, just yeah, thinking about time and tempo and the busyness, and then how like maximizing. I don't even like those words because they sound so, businessy. Um but like yeah, how can we grow something efficiently and not have waste and not waste our time? Because not only is it wasteful of time, money, say if we grow a row of lettuce that we didn't harvest it. That happened a couple times last year. We had like 2 or 3 rows. It's just like, oh, we didn't harvest this. That was a waste of our time. But thinking about that, it's like, oh, we still, I don't know. I just wanted to throw all that out there, and like, yeah, the question of tempo when it comes to this kind of stuff. Because then for us, it's like farming's not the only thing that we do. So we're constantly busy, even though we live this lifestyle and have the freedom to, oh, listen to what we want, go play with the dog, take a little longer lunch, start later, start earlier, whatever. So just wanted to like throw that out there in the tempo question. I don't know if you have anything to say or some other people, but
I'll
tempo.
say one thing on the tempo note with the farm. Just I was at this homesteading symposium at the Wagon Box last week, and one of the presenters used a quote by Mrs. Nearing, and I forget her first name. There's Mr. and Mrs. Nearing, and they're a couple of the first homesteader people in the American movement towards that. And the quote said, "I did not move to the countryside to make money. I moved to the countryside to make time."
Mm.
And I just love that. Yeah.
Before we get into what Ruiz wanted to say, I just wanted to say that I would throw out the idea of like efficiency as the wrong way of thinking about it, because even that's a machine heart. I think that the word Fukuoka sensei would use is simplicity. You want it to be simple. Um, that because simplicity, it includes everything that's necessary and nothing that isn't, and in a way where they all fit together. So that to me is better than the idea of efficiency, because efficiency is about optimization along a single metric. Simplicity is more about nothing extraneous and about coherence.
This might be a good place to bring in the James Covey from the Seven Habits book when he says that there's this big difference between efficiency and effectiveness. Like that's the term he tries to use for a more
Yeah.
holistic approach.
Mhm.
There's effective, but I like simple. And maybe later I'll bring back in polyface and how I think it might connect to all this stuff. So
Yeah, Ruiz, I'd love to hear your comment.
Yeah, can you hear me? Nice.
Yes.
Thanks for the presentation. Great. That was very interesting. Um, I saw immediately I saw a bunch of parallels with like Ian McGilchrist and the idea of like the parts and the whole and how we kind of like it's almost like I don't even want to say we refuse to see it. It's almost like we have this filter because like we filter everything through the metaphor of the machine because of the way that our society has kind of developed, like almost like it seems like alongside the machine at this point because of our infatuation with it. Um, and I found it interesting how you were mentioning how we're kind of in a catch-22 at this point because, yeah, we do want to maybe back off of some of these things, but how do you sell that to, how does the politician, whose job is almost to confabulate for us at this point, they're almost like if we think of it as like they're almost like that left side of our brain that is in charge of confabulating and saying no, the answer is more technology, like we need to put more machines into this, and if only we could develop like a better machine, we'll be able to figure this out. And I love how you started the presentation with that with the philosopher who approaches the farmer, and he's like, there's a machine that can do it. And the farmer was like gracious enough to like hear him out and then be like, dude, you're just asking for trouble. It's almost like he like put it right back on him as a, yeah, the machine will make this more convenient, but I'll basically just lose we'll lose our entire life if we go for something like that. So yeah, I don't, that's really kind of all I have. I mean, this was great. I love the whole thing. So
That's awesome. I think you're picking up what I'm laying down, so that makes me happy. I think Jacob was next.
Um, hey Matthew, thank you so much for that talk. This is a thinker I was completely unfamiliar with, but as someone who's studied the philosophy of science and who I think maybe significantly for this conversation was raised in the farming lifestyle and purposefully left it in adulthood. Um, there's a lot here that really resonates with my own work, especially the fact that science is constantly forgetting that it's a symbolic frame that gets pushed on top of or attempted to put around nature, not that it is itself a description of that nature. um but I guess for me, the question of population tends to come up in discussions of sustainability and future simplicity. And so kind of bearing current present TU interest in natalism. I'm just curious, like what your maybe your take on this, if you don't know Fukuoka's, whether because he seems like a very bright, he's obviously a scientific minded person, like how he felt about population, whether he was a someone who had because when someone starts talking about everyone farming and growing their own food in a way that they and their families could live off of, I start to get whiffs of Malthusianism in the room. Like, I wonder, is that a thing that he thought that 10 billion people could do? Or did he think that we had too many billions of people running around on this earth? Assuming that those are binary alternatives.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, but I think he would reject the binary. I think that he would say that like more people is not better and fewer people is not worse. And he's not going to wish destruction on anybody. I mean, I don't he at no point ever um, makes any intimation about anything about racial groups or about whether it would be better for there to be fewer or more people. I think his belief is that nature is fundamentally generous, and so there probably we that nature could support a lot of people, and with less effort. His point is like, and with less effort than we're currently putting in. But the problem that he's hitting on and he doesn't talk about is that how do you ratchet back from once you've added all the interventions? When you start to take the interventions away, health doesn't return immediately. And this is the problem that we're facing politically. That how do you sell the pain of change to people? Because change is painful. And if you've been going down the wrong path for long enough, that change is going to be really painful when the price you've been pushing off comes home and you have to revert back to kind of like a lower level where you can begin to then kind of retrace your steps. And I think that's the problem that we're running into, is that we're fundamentally locked ourselves into industrial agricultural practices and a capitalist system built on line go up forever. And the whole financial system is built on that reality. So fundamentally, we've just locked ourselves into we can't go down. You just have to keep ratcheting up the ante. And someday the price is going to be paid by somebody. And people are just hoping they're not the generation who has to pay the price. Boomers are making us pay the price for their retirement. Um, and I'm hoping that I don't make my children pay the price for my old age. But what we've got is just people keep passing the buck and adding new interventions to cope with the symptoms that are arising from a fundamental dysfunction. And I don't know how you sell that politically. I think you just have to be forced into it. I think it's like an alcoholic who just hits rock bottom and your friends finally say, hey, you need to go to the AA meeting, or hey, you need to go sober up at the therapy retreat, you know? I don't know how you get to that point, to like the point where people as a community are willing to go through that pain without hitting something like a rock bottom. And it sounds horrible to say that because you don't desire the rock bottom, but you also know that until the rock bottom hits, the chances of change are so low, you know, and you want to change. And the longer that the rock bottom isn't hit, the more the system builds up the tension and the worse it's going to be when you hit rock bottom. And so it's this horrible sort of situation where you know that the change isn't going to come until the pain comes, but you don't want pain. You know, like I don't desire civilizational disorder, but I don't see how it can be avoided. And I also don't, and I'm not optimistic about us changing until it happens and we're forced to deal with it. So I kind of got a little bit off of your question there, but if there's anything else you want me to address, I feel like I'm kind of trying there.
No, I appreciate your thoughts on it. It is a contradiction I think we have to face, that we know that lines don't always go up, but we love it when the line that is us, the population line, goes up. So that is a thing we have to confront at some point, I think.
The way I feel about it is like, I personally, being pro-human, think that like on the whole, it's better to have more humans, because I think humans are like, what they create is so beautiful and amazing, and every human is so unique and like this opportunity.
We're cool. We're a cool species. I
I
like
know
it.
we're
Yeah.
super cool. We're also like super evil as well. Like we do horrible things. But like on the whole, I think it's better to have more people than not. But the truth is that that's just a valuation judgment. And humanity could be fine with fewer people. We could live at a lower level, and we might even be happier. But we've decided that we're like, we want to do this like more people thing, and there's probably a way to do it. The world, like Fukuoka sensei's point is, the nature is generous. You've got to get into nature's pattern though to receive her gifts. And our problem is, we've set this mission for ourselves of like more people, just more, and we think we've got a system that's going to generate the resources necessary to do that, and it's actually very fragile and not resilient.
I just super quickly want to plant a seed and then go to Caden while we're on this that we can talk about later. And I'm sure Dave will have something to say about Joel Salatin as an example of someone kind of doing the farming practices in this like biomimicry kind of way with, no chemicals. He's not bringing in feed. He's even like using water from his own property and ponds. But one of the reasons people like on the more progressive or left side will question him when it seems like everything he's doing is very much, eco conscious, hippy dippy, whatever. They'll say, well, Joel, we can't feed humanity this way. We can't feed an entire civilization or the United States this way that you're doing. And he's like, no, but actually you can, because this way, like, it's better for the soil. We're creating more pasture for cows. The cows are better, and they're like the cows themselves are more nutrient dense. That's gonna go farther and make you feel more sustained. So like I said, we can kind of go to that maybe, and Dave will have more to say. But yeah, there's this idea coming from, of course, the bureaucrats and the businesses that would hurt if we said, okay, no one's ever gonna buy pesticides, chemicals again. We're just not gonna do that. Like, of course, they have their interests, but then there's just this false notion that, oh, but we can't feed everyone this sustainably by following nature. We must mechanize it. We must make it the most efficient that it can be to feed everyone strawberries all year round, no matter where they live. So I'll leave it at that. But yeah, Kaden, go ahead.
Hi there. Yeah, thanks for giving that talk. Was catching up on the last few lectures for this course over the past couple days because I've missed the past couple weeks, and all this content about regenerative farming. I'm finding what's the word? Just very compelling. I've got a coworker at my barista job who her family's involved with this, and I've always just kind of ignored her and what she had to say because I don't know, she's just one of those people that like I know that she voted for Trump, and so I just kind of discredited whatever she was saying. And then I'm hearing all this stuff about Joel Salatin, and this is my first introduction to Fukuoka. But I to relate it back to your lecture that you just gave, I really like the metaphor of tempo and rhythm and the imagery of music that conjures. Uh, the one thought that I've been relating to back in my own life regarding, why I'm feeling unsatisfied or uh, maybe not depressed, that might be a strong word, but that lack, seeing that something is missing, is that I feel like there's this large degree of disharmony, and I think that idea of tempo really gets at that. That grind set culture is something that really looms over my mind, and it's hard trying to live in this. I don't know, I'm in a college town in California, so like there's definitely a specific culture that everybody around me is in, and I recognize that I don't like a lot of aspects of it, but then how do I actually get out of it? And So yeah, all this stuff about doing less and farming, like it's been very compelling lately. And I think that metaphor of music, it also it brings the virtue of order into alignment as well, in that it's not just that you're gonna stop trying. Like you said, it's not nihilism. You're not just giving up on society, but it's about recognizing where the natural tempo is more or less orienting you to. And then back to the comment that you made just a moment ago about, recognizing that we probably, as a society, need to hit this rock bottom. The first thing that brings to my mind is ideas on accelerationism, and is it good to be doing harm reduction? Are you just hurting more people for a longer amount of time? And I wonder how that reconciles with that idea of don't try to do anything. The first thing that made me think of was Yoda, do or do not, there is no try. And I think if you think about it too long, how do you do anything if you're not trying to do something? But yeah, I wonder where that balance is between, letting things die when they need to, and preserving life at the same time, and preserving happiness. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, we're in a really thank you. Those are great comments. I think we're in a dark place where, like you mentioned, harm reduction. We've got this idea that like there's people on the street who are addicted to heroin, and that the more loving thing is like the choices between like right now letting them die or helping them to get more heroin. And it's like that's sort of like the choice that we're presented with. The like there's a sense in which the loving option is allowing things to die, but like there's something about that feels deeply wrong. And I think that we can think about like, well, maybe like human beings can be helped and saved. And I think that that's the case. I think that leaving heroin addicts to die is probably the wrong decision, but I think that put it like another level, our culture is allergic to experiencing consequences. And consequence of being addicted to heroin doesn't have to be you die, because oftentimes it's more than just your own personal decision involved in addiction that you ended up in. It's very messy, you know? But the idea of like you're addicted to heroin, so like we are going to say put you in we're going to lock you up and you're not exactly going to have freedom of movement and be able to do whatever you want. That would be like an example of a consequence that actually could be loving to somebody. And I think that that's like the experience of consequences in our culture. We could totally disagree about what would be the right approach to that, but we live in a culture where no limits and no consequences are the fundamental drive. And that is this like unhealthy, enabling, sort of devouring mother type culture where human beings are allowed to just go to the limit of destroying themselves. And sometimes you might need to have some of the pain of needing to be forced to change. And that's fundamentally like our culture is on that path of just keep pushing the consequences under the rug, just print more money, just issue more bonds, just change the tax structure, just have a new policy, on start a new war, on and on. It's just about how can we take one more intervention to avoid the consequences of the last intervention or the last five that are chasing us down. So I've got a lot more thoughts about what you said, but I'm really happy that you're taking the green pill, because I think the green pill is blacker than the black pill, but it it goes it takes you out into a much better vista in the end. Like once you like to me, when you start pulling on the thread of food in our society, it just starts to connect to everything. When you see the fragility and the dysfunction of how we provide for the basics in our society, the way that we treat land, the way that we treat food, the way that we treat nature, when you start to see how dysfunctional we are at that, you begin to see the same pattern crop up everywhere in society. And that's why Fukuoka Sensei focuses on eating and making food, and how those are actually essential to how we understand ourselves. How you eat is crucial to who you are as a person. So to me, the green pill can take you really far, and it seems kind of weirdly idiosyncratic. But I think that it leads toward a better place in the long run.
Quick little commercial break here to share that members at Theory Underground really drive everything. This is ultimately my project for the development of my theory, but it is also something that helps other people in the development of their own theory. And if it wasn't for other people who are finding that useful, well, I don't know that I would be here today. And so I want to say thank you to the membership here at Theory Underground. You guys make all of this possible. If you are interested in becoming a member at Theory Underground, that's how you would access the ongoing and past courses and seminars at TU, as well as office hours, the lecture boot camp, as well as the Reclaim Writing workshop or the Projectus cohort, which are all things available to people depending on the tier that you become a member at. Okay, and so yeah, it can be a lot of fun, and it's also a great way to take what would otherwise just be a hobby and instead turn it into a serious undertaking. So I'm not saying that everybody who's not involved is not doing something serious, but I am saying one of the best ways to get serious is to become a member. All right, and that's how you're gonna meet a lot of cool people, learn a lot of really cool things, and also, this is one thing I really wanted to plug right now. It's also how you would get access to the year-long course being taught by Samuel Lonkar. Dr. Samuel Lonkar is teaching Philosophy of Religion. It's a course that gives you a deep look inside of the heated debate over the nature of religion, philosophy, and science. No one better, perhaps, could be teaching this course than Dr. Samuel Lonkar. We've had a lot of amazing professors join and teach guest lectures and courses at Theory Underground over the years that you can access as a member. But Samuel Lonkar is the guy for this year, and he's killing it. People are loving it, and I am proud and honored to be able to host him. And so if you want to get involved, yeah, you get access to my stuff, you get access to his stuff, you get access to a lot of really cool stuff. So theoryunderground.com/subscribe is the best way to do it. Hope to see you soon. I love that you're talking about the green pill. I don't think we've ever really put it that way. So we should be. We talk about all these other pills all the time, so why not? I have a few things on the where we're at, and there's two habits of thinking that I think got instilled in me at an early age, and that I didn't even realize until after college and after several years of sort of post-left theory. But I think, yeah, on the one side, it is sort of this sort of left populist, not populist, population thinking, which is essentially like the, well, what about everybody? You know, it's almost like I find myself doing this constantly, but it's like I switch into thinking, well, how's this going to work for everybody? And it's weird because I was never really a Kantian, and I was never really a utilitarian, right? These are two approaches that are both basically about, on the one side, social harmony for everybody. Don't do something unless you would have it turned into a rule that everybody else would do. And then on the other side, maximizing pleasure for everybody, minimizing pain for everybody. And both are absolutely essential if you are a part of the ruling class. Both are absolutely essential if you are actively making decisions that impact large populations. But once I realized I'm not trying to be like Benjamin Studebaker, I'm not going to go do that. I'm not going to have those conversations. I'm not trying to become the consultant for a billionaire or for a president. I'm not going to be brought into the UN. They're not going to ask my opinion. What I realized was like, oh, well, that's interesting. I wonder what happens when I stop asking these questions, right? Now, but with that said, I just kind of wanted to put a big old sort of cautionary note to doing this sort of population thinking. But with it in place, I just want to say, I think the ruling class has always been Malthusians. There's, the progressives especially. I don't think that's ever really changed. I think that if we just look at K through 12 education in the United States, that kind of proves the point. And the fact that they want to spread that education to the rest of the world furthers the point, because they'll talk about, oh, look, they're having way too many babies and they're so poor, which is just more of that same Malthusianism. So those are things that I think about when I think about Malthusianism. Would it be good if there were more people? Would it be bad? I'm not a scientist. I'm not a statesman. I don't have to think these questions, but I hope that people can continue to live in a way where they get to have children, right? I hope that nothing's going to come along and make it so we can't. Right now, it does seem like there's a lot of things coming along to make it so that we can't. And so natalism for me is a lot more of an openness towards the new and cultivating the potential for future generations, not necessarily literally by having children. It doesn't have to always be literal, because there's other ways of cultivating natality. But with that all said, I would say some of the worst things for life, whether it be individuals' lives or their children's lives, really does come down to the food system today. And so that's why I said in the chat, Matthew was saying he doesn't want to have to see this where we're reaching the bottom and all of this other stuff and where we're forced to deal with it. And I said, I think it's already happening and we're already being forced to deal with it. And I think a lot of us are doing theory because we kind of are realizing that, and whether that's framed as climate change or the rise in school shooting or the mental health epidemic, there's also the top three killers in the United States are cancer, heart disease, and diabetes. These are all food related. These are also related to the specialization of sports and the fact that only a handful of people do sports. And if they do it, then they do it hardcore. And that everybody else is working in a sort of sedentary lifestyle. Or if they move a lot, they move only a couple of limbs in a repeated way that is also disabling. And so really, that's one of the reasons I really like Socrates' approach to farming and in the Oikonomicus, just to tie it all back to the seminar that this is a part of, is just to say that, it's about the form of life that we live. And so with all of that kind of said, and then setting aside the population thinking part of it, as an individual, how does it change your life, right? Or as a family, how does it change your family's life? And, I think farming could be a really, really bad choice for a lot of people. I disagree with him if he really thinks everybody should be doing it. But it is one of those things where it's like maybe 1 out of 100 people should be doing it. And so then I'll close out by just saying that when it comes to Joel Salatin, there's a lot of really interesting stuff that can come from bringing polyface farming and Fukuoka together. And I think that Fukuoka is like the other extreme. And so you have like the thesis of Western modern agriculture. You have the antithesis, which would be Fukuoka. And then I think Joel Salatin would be an example of a kind of synthesis that maintains elements of both sides, but also contradicts elements of both sides. And for him, the key term would be in management intensive. And so for polyface, it is management intensive, but I think it goes well with what you said about it's not lazy, it's not easy, but it's also not busy. And I think that that's all true of the polyface approach, which is able to, on like 500 acres, produce more food than all these other farms that are like 10 times his size. It does require more management. It requires your heart kind of being into it. It requires wanting to be there and not being one of these bureaucrat farmers who is basically an indentured middle manager for banks that bought out all of the other farms, which is where a lot of farmers are today. They've been sold this lie of time saving, and now they just sit around and watch TV. And Joel's like, no, I want to be touching grass. I want to be actually walking around the premises, spending time with the animals, moving them every couple of days. Yeah, it's a lot more work, but it's more meaningful work. It's more fulfilling. And so I do believe that there would be a world, 100 years from now, where the majority of the food is coming from farms that size. And and I also believe that there's enough people in the world today already wanting that kind of a lifestyle that it's totally possible. And I think that there's a lot of genuine callings where that this principle of 1 per 100 or 1 per 250 or what, that kind of scale could work. You know, teachers who only serve a population that size are going to be better off than teachers at Columbine, where they're serving 5,000 students who never actually have any teachers that really know their names, and they just become like numbers, right? It's just it is a big problem. But then, yeah, we do have a lot of land that could be worked with in these kinds of approaches. I say all of that fully aware that, this kind of thing opens the door for the selling off of public land to the worst kinds of corporations. And so, that whole discourse gets captured. But with that said, this is a more preferable way of life, I think. That's why I choose it. It's not, I don't choose it to save the planet. I hope it also does that, but I genuinely do it because I think it's more grounding, and it's just a better way to live for me. And I say that thinking, well, if 1 out of 100 people lives this way, the other 99 people are probably going to be a bit more around it. And the Shinrin-yoku book, which is also by a Japanese author, it's all about how Japan has become really pro getting people outside, getting them to take walks in the forest, talking about how it has a thermostatic sort of equilibrium inducing kind of effect on your blood pressure. And they've begun prescribing outdoor time before they prescribe pills, just as a sort of, as a general rule outside of extreme cases. And so Shinrin-yoku is a really great example of like, yeah, people benefit from being closer to nature. That doesn't mean everybody has to be out there literally farming, I don't think, but yeah. I know that was a lot, but there you go.
Well, let me jump in with a couple of my own thoughts. So one thing that I want to mention, and this does get a little bit of what Jacob was saying too, there's a lot of discussion now around things like degrowth. And so I kind of want to position in relation to that kind of conversation a little bit. One of the things that the left often critiques degrowth as capitalist austerity. So, degrowth is seen as this Trojan horse for capitalists being able to lower your quality of life in order to either continue to maximize their own profit or cover over the brokenness in the system to try to keep prolonging it. Austerity. This is what happens to a nation that is approaching financial crisis. Austerity is implemented, and typically the price is paid by ordinary individuals, not the people who made the decisions that got the country into the situation. So I think it's important to be aware of where ideas like Fukuoka sensei, where they're being used and who's talking about them. Because I would personally I would just write off anybody who is rich and powerful who is talking this way personally. And I think the reason that Fukuoka sensei has such gravity to an insight in his work is because he went and made his life about this. He embodied it in his own living. He farmed this way. He didn't seek to be well known. He didn't seek to gain any power. In fact, in the book, he describes like he's angry. He literally was angry at a grocery store for how much they were charging for his food. So he stopped sending it to them because they were marking it up too much. So like he does not care about being famous, about being rich, about doing anything of note. This is why he says that to be great is to not to try to do anything. So like I think that like the best way to approach this is through figuring out ways to embody it in your own life. And so I do think that this type of talk from anybody of any level of power is probably a ploy. I don't trust it. And I would just kind of like point that out, is that I do think that these types of ideas can be used to push austerity, but I would also push back against anybody who tries to characterize this as inherently a Trojan horse for austerity. I think that's a defense mechanism for people who want to live an urban, modern, consumptive lifestyle and don't want to pay the price or to question that fundamental orientation. I think that one of the great temptations of the left right now is to be um, consumption focused, not production focused. It's this talk about the affordability crisis. The issue isn't the production system itself, but rather how the fruits of the production system are distributed. It's that there is this incredible abundance that is being hoarded by the rich and powerful, and we're just getting the crumbs. And there's truth to that when you look at how wages haven't kept up with inflation, when you look about how profit has gone up continually with corporations. So there's truth to that. But the reason that groceries are expensive is not because grocery stores are getting rich. The reason is because of a dysfunctional system in our country, fundamentally. The reason that all these things are so expensive, the things that we want to access, is because artificial scarcity is being created by fragile systems that are not resilient, that they do not reflect the rhythms of nature, and that they're spreadsheet brained, is one way to put it. So like a lot of leftists are angry about like the buses cost money and groceries are too expensive, when they should be angry about Fukuoka sensei saying like, hey, I can outproduce industrial agriculture on my 2/3 of an acre. Don't you think we could probably produce enough food for natural farming to make like really cheap food? Like, we should be angry about the fact that it is possible to make lots of good food very cheaply, not the fact that the food that does exist is expensive, that is produced in this non-resilient, fragile supply chain. That to me is like, it's like not the real problem. And it feels pressing because things are expensive and brutal right now. But like the problem is not I'm being prevented from consuming. It's that fundamentally our system of production is broken. So that's one thing that I would point out. The other, actually, I have one more thing to say, but did anybody want to comment on just what I just said?
I have two questions, but I'll save them for later on.
Okay. So the other thing I want to say about Fukuoka sensei is that like there's a part of me that's not fully sold on his vision, which is like philosophically what I struggle with in what he says is kind of this vision that he paints of for instance, he says the human being was a happy creature, but he created a hard world and now he struggles to try to break out of it. In nature, there is life and death, and nature is joyful. In human society, there is life and death, and people live in sorrow. To me, the difficulty of a Taoist or Buddhist vision pushed to its limit is that it doesn't have room for evil, for the possibility of evil or of radical negativity. So I like what I can't help but hear in Fukuoka sensei's vision is this kind of Rousseauian story of nature's pure, but we departed from nature. Now we need to get back to nature to realize our true essence. And humans are essentially, generous and good, and they want to share and cooperate and live in harmony. But if only we could be in the right environment, like we created this cruel environment for ourselves, which has made us into cruel people. But if we could be returned to nature, we would become once again what David Graeber calls like disaster communists. When all of civilization falls apart and people standing up in the wreckage, they suddenly recognize each other as fellow humans and begin to just spontaneously engage and share in mutual aid and that kind of thing. And I just do not buy that view of nature or of human beings. Like, I do think that human beings are creatures with a capacity for evil. Now, I mean, this is sort of the Calvinist original sin view of mine kind of coming through. And the view of like original sin in Calvinism is not the confession that everything humans do is evil. It's that evil, the capacity for evil, touches every aspect of what a human being does. So there's no part of the human being, thought, action, speech, there's no part of it that doesn't harbor or has the opportunity to be distorted by the influence of evil. And so to me, I just don't see a way to eliminate the possibility of radical negativity in this scenario. And this is the thing that I struggle with the most. I'm kind of like, this is my Christianity, this is my Westernism, kind of like coming through. Um, Dave is asking for a definition of evil. Yeah, I think that I kind of go with Saint Augustine on this idea of evil as a privation of good, and yeah, this idea of radical negativity is just like a negativity that insists on itself. It's what Barth calls the impossible possibility, a negativity that's turned back in on itself somehow, which is, I think, an ineliminable part of reality, is that wherever there's negativity, it can become reflexive. And so um, where I struggle with the Taoist and Buddhist vision is that I don't see a role for this. And for instance, if we accept the whole as it is, doesn't discriminating knowledge also arise naturally, suggesting that it too has a role and a purpose? Fukuoka sensei is trying to demonstrate the limits and hubris of discriminating knowledge, which I agree is needed. But at times, I think that the Zen and Taoist tradition goes beyond just critiquing the hubris to the very thing itself, is like, this is the barrier that stands between us and being fully present, of being in harmony with nature. They reject discriminating knowledge outright as the source of the problem. And I don't know if we can do that. Like, I don't know if we can just totally reject discriminating knowledge, because the whole produces it. It arises naturally. And so, doesn't it have a role? Doesn't it have a function? What is its role and function? If it gets out of its role, it makes sense to me that it would cause problems. But what is its role? And where does it fit? And how can we put limits on it? And what does the fact that it does arise say about the situation? So to me, this is the Žižekian sort of question that is asked of Buddhism.
Yeah.
Well, it looks like I killed things with that. So we could jump into Jacob. You said you had a few thoughts, but you'd save them for later. We can always keep that moving
Well,
forward. And
my first one was gonna demand a confrontation between Lacanianism and Taoism from you, but since you just performed that quite excellently, I guess I just have the follow-up question, is that, speaking of Zizek, will we see you down in Redwood City later this month?
yes, you will. I will be
Awesome.
there.
Awesome. Excellent to hear.
I'm very excited. Let's pray for his health. Not that I think he's in poor health. I have no clue, but he is quite old and drinks a lot of Coca-Cola. So I think it's a miracle he's made it this far.
Let's
Every
pray for all
time
our health.
we ask him or email him, hey, you want to do this? Hey, I want to do this. He goes, can't, sick, dying. And that's literally the email for the last few years. So yes, pray for Zizek's health.
Yeah, it's been his default ever since the last time we had him on. Though he still gives us stuff to publish, which is great. But on the question of Taoist philosophy and Buddhism, you kind of addressed the question of nihilism a little bit there in your actual lecture, and I kind of want to bring it back to that. There's obviously different conceptions of nihilism, but I take humanity knows nothing, and kind of the everything that kind of it followed from that to be such an extreme, position. It's like, well, we clearly know some things. I mean, discriminating knowledge is stuff, these are things that we know, obviously. Like, clearly we know some things. And we're able to do a lot with those things. So, I mean, I guess I kind of want to hear you steelman it. I have my own way that maybe I would try to steelman what he's doing. But I would love to hear what you're thinking there.
Yeah, I think that when he says humanity knows nothing, it's like I think that he has a specific meaning of no in mind. But I do think he wants to make you uncomfortable. Um, to me, it makes me think of David Hume of like, do you know the sun is going to rise tomorrow? Like, do you know it? Like, knowledge is knowledge is something that can be verified. It can be certain. Like I think a lot of the things that we say we know are is more of just like, oh, I believe this, or I have an intuition, or this is an operating assumption. Like this is the whole modern philosophical project is when you start to actually look at what knowledge is, you're like, wait, this doesn't work. I can't actually know anything. I mean, this is Descartes' whole point. Like you can doubt everything. And then Zen comes in and says, you think, therefore you are? No way. Let's doubt the shit out of that. And so, like, I mean, pick up Keiji Nishitani's Religion and Nothingness. Like he's critiquing the hell out of this idea. Like, no, that is a snake eating its own tail. The I who asks about the I is a different I than is being verified. So, like, I think at a certain point, the idea of what knowledge is, you can't find an object that conforms to knowledge. You can't find something where you can verify it and be certain about it. So like at a I do think that I am sort of a radical skeptic in this sense, but like it's because I view knowledge as something very specific. And the problem is that we use the term a lot in a non-technical way when really we have like a lot of really good operating assumptions that are like pretty good in general, but also those operating assumptions could just be like they could be more like a broken clock that's right twice a day. And I think that Fukuoka's sensei's point is that we don't have the knowledge that we think we do. We're maybe right like by accident a lot, or like we've hit on something that works good enough to where we think it to where we like think we know it, but actually there's something much deeper going on. Um, or like it works, but like it could be better, and we don't realize that it could be better. We just think this is the way it is. So to me, like I lean towards his skepticism because I define knowledge as something very specific that I do think is an incoherent notion. And clearly Kant was concerned by the incoherence of knowledge as well. It's why he awoke from his dogmatic slumber and he needed to answer Hume. Um, I think that Kant's answer is really interesting. And I think that it is important because it realizes that there's something about consciousness is involved in the very thing that it's knowing, which is the point of connection. That's the point of hope. And that's Fukuoka's whole point is like, you are a part of the thing that you're trying to know. So, like, don't try to know the whole thing, just get into the thing and be a part of it. And like that point of connection between like you can know the world because you're a part of it is both a point of despair because you can never know the world because you're not the world, but also you're a part of it. So you can actually engage with it truly. And so I think if you go down far enough inside, you come out on the outside is sort of how I think about it. Because you are in the world. But Fukuoka's point is like you can never grasp the whole. And so, like, whatever sort of operative assumption you have, it is false. Everything you think is fundamentally false because it does not capture the whole. But it might be good enough to work with. But his point is like, actually, our whole theory that we're working with is really bad. I guess that's my steel man.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really good. Um, yeah, I was kind of already thinking in terms of phenomenology here, and I'm glad you brought in the Kyoto Circle and or Kyoto School, and so it goes well with Heidegger's being in time and basically just there's different kinds of knowledge, and this kind that is presence ontology based is fundamentally like incapable of achieving the kinds of or delivering on the kinds of promises that it's making. So that's all really good. But I also want to say at the level of like a theory that is a practice. You know, in phenomenology, there's the idea of bracketing, and also of just like of choosing something as given and then running with it, right? And I think he's doing that. And that if you think about, I've met people in permaculture who take his whole idea maybe a little too far. Like they don't want to weed anything and they don't want to bend over, like they really just expect the earth to turn into Eden all around them as long as they align their chakras correctly. And it's like, look, man, he's just proving how much you can do with how little. How simple can we actually get? And so it's a bending the bow procedure. It is a form of bracketing put into practice. It's beautiful in that sense. And I really like it. Yeah. So thank you.
Yeah, because like, you could always point out like the performative contradiction of like you set out to disprove that humans don't know anything, like sort of like a very weird project, but like it's completely consistent if you're just trying to, as he says, directly confront the reality of living. That's the project, is just directly confront the reality of living without constructing a castle that you are mediating everything through, and where you've come to serve the model and try to twist reality to fit the model, as opposed to engaging with things and let them tell you about them as you understand how you are a part of it. And to some extent, you have to be okay with not knowing, as he says. Like there's this fundamentally and I've been planning to write about this, but I think that what grinds the gears of science about this approach is that it requires grace. There's a belief in grace of like, I cannot make something happen. I am not the deciding causal factor. I cannot master something. I can't control it. But actually, through my participation in some broader ecosystem, that actually good things and gifts and generosity can come forth from that. And that it's actually the ecosystem and the system of interactions itself that achieves that in a way that I can't fully understand and grasp. I think that the grace is what helps us traverse the gap from mastery to receiving the good gifts. I can, if folks want, I could also turn these, or I can export these notes as a PDF if people would be interested.
I would be quite interested in that, actually.
Cool. I'll send that to Dave.
Let's add it to a public forum post on the Discord, actually. That'd be a good place for it.
Sorry, you want me to add where?
Oh, in a public forum post on the Discord.
Got it.
That'd be a good place for it.
Then
Which, by the way, is going to be
go.
replaced. That'll be replaced here any day now. We really don't know when, by the new app. And so when I say replaced, I don't know how. I hope so. I don't like to make tech promises, but there will be a public forum on the actual Theory Underground app. And so that's very exciting. And not just a public forum, but also, stuff that's devoted to certain lectures where it's like you have to watch the lecture and actually answer a question before you can see other people's conversation about it, that kind of thing. And so should become this, for instance, will be a standalone lecture on the site. And then, people could share a reflection on it, and then they'll be able to see what other people are saying about it.
I was gonna say this lecture deserves, its own thread for the conversation. It shouldn't like be something that gets dumped in the hype channel and then vanishes.
Exactly. Well, Matthew, Yeah, anything you want to say in close here? Because yeah, this was really great.
Yeah, just to thank you. I really appreciated it. I actually the copy that I had of this book, I gave it away to somebody like a couple of years ago who I thought would love it. And so I just ordered 2 more copies of it so that I have one for myself and another to give away. So it's reached to the level of like this is a give it away to people book because it's that good and it really will influence you. And to me, it feels like on the level with Ivan Illich in terms of the way that it influences me as well. So sort of building a core set of texts like Deschooling Society, and then I would pair it with the One Straw Revolution and that kind of thing. So, and honestly, this is going to feed into the lecture for Foucault in March. I'll be lecturing for Intro to Theory on an Intro to Foucault. So you'll be getting a slightly contrarian take of Foucault that's critical, of capitalism and reads him in that context. And I'm looking forward to that as well because I read Foucault and Illich and Fukuoka Sensei together as forming this core critique against capital and the administrative state and that kind of thing. So hopefully you can start to string those together, and I'll help you do that so it's not too hard.
We cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Welcome to Theory Underground, a place for workers with earbuds who are tired of letting others read and think on their behalf, slipstreaming our way into an understanding of the situation that short-circuits the deadlocks of our moment.
Theory Underground has been around long enough at this point that we have people joining who say, I was watching Theory Underground for 1.5 to 2, sometimes 3 years before I decided to join. That's really cool. It's amazing that there's a good handful of people out there in the world who get something from this kind of super niche content. It's not easy, doing stuff that is this niche in this part of the internet, because all of the algorithmic incentives would have me just pumping out more and more and more of the same thinkers, whatever's trendy, whatever has a bunch of people showing up to talk about it at conferences or whatever. But I like to take a much wider and longer view of the situation and think a lot deeper about who's going to help us really think through the moment. And I like to draw on those people that are the best for thinking about the situation, not just the most popular. And so in that vein, though, Intro to Theory, it's a course unlike any other. What you just saw was Intro to Nietzsche. I've already done Intro to Marx, part of which is up on the channel for free subscribers. But if you become a member at Theory Underground, you get access to the full version of that, as well as the upcoming lecture on Heidegger that I'll be giving. There's also going to be an upcoming lecture on Heidegger by Simon Critchley, the absolute legend. We've got a whole bunch of amazing guest lecturers for Intro to Theory throughout the year lined up, and there's going to be a bunch of other thinkers. We're going to be getting into Lacan and Levinas and Bourdieu and Baudrillard, and we've got guest lectures on Burke and McLuhan and all kinds of other thinkers like Luhmann and stuff like that. So I if you're interested in any of this that's been going on at Theory Underground and you want to get more involved, then now's the time. If you've been watching this stuff for a while and you keep thinking, I might do this, well, now's a good time to be doing it, because Intro to Theory is an awesome on-ramp. And it's happening at the exact same time that we're doing Philosophy of Stewardship. Not at the exact same time. Philosophy of Stewardship happens on the first Sunday of every month. And then Intro to Theory usually happens on the third Saturday of every month. But then we have guest lectures. And also for members, there's a monthly office hours where you can ask me anything and kind of talk about your projects. Then there is, for gold members and higher, a special thing called Reclaim Writing Workshop, as well as Lecture Bootcamp Workshop. So if that sounds interesting, if you want to develop yourself as a writer, as a speaker, this is an amazing opportunity to get involved. And finally, if you want to get involved at the platinum level, this is a great way to develop a project, whether that be a book, a blog, or something else. The Projectus Cohort 2026 is ongoing. It's fantastic. It's a lot of fun. Get involved now. theoryunderground.com/subscribe. Finally, just your last reminder here, I made a game. Canon TCG, the liberal arts trading card game. And Canon Fest, the official launch of the first edition of this game, is going to be at the end of August at the same time as TUCon 2026. Apply now. Spots are going fast. This thing will fill out. And it has always been an absolute blast to do stuff in person. Everybody has always loved it. We've never had any problems or complaints. And so if you want to be a part of this thing, it's going to be really great. We've been doing it for 3 years. It's just getting better. Let's go. Let's go. Hope to see you there.